I got a brother in the infantry, I thought you knowed. I got a brother in the infantry, he's away down that road. I got a brother in the infantry, and he smokes cigarettes same as me, and I'm gonna put my name down. I'm gonna put my name down, brother, where do I sign? Each and every month I lay my money on the line. Gotta keep those tanks a-rolling, the airplanes a-humming, and the dollars a-coming, and I'm gonna put my name down.
Princeton is a small town in southwestern British Columbia. It lies on the edge of a majestic rangeland and is bounded on the east and north by spectacular fruit-growing lands. The area has traditionally relied on ranching, mining, and forestry. The train came in 1915, but road links were very slow in coming. In 1939, the streets were all dirt, and some of the sidewalks were still boards. Dust was a big problem. Thomas Duff Patullo was premier of the province, and Mackenzie King was prime minister. In the spring, the Bruins won the cup. The Similkameen Star newspaper claimed that criminal sentences were too light and that the premier didn't care about finishing the road to the coast. The local basketball team won the provincial championship in '38, and there was talk that the Western Canada Ski Championship would be held here next year. You could have beer delivered from the local brewery, but you had to call through an operator. You could go to the newly renovated cinema. 1939 was the best year for movies ever. The surrounding communities of Copper Mountain, Allenby, Colmont, Headley, and Carameus were constantly competing with one another in all manner of sports. Hockey, softball, badminton, boxing, skiing, basketball were some. There was even attempts to start both soccer and lacrosse leagues. The Star newspaper mentions very little about international affairs. They left this to the Vancouver province, but it became hard to ignore. In Europe, tensions continued to rise as Italy invaded Albania. An ad in the Star suggested that the Kelvinator refrigerator for sale at the Princeton Photo and Radio Store was said to provide the equivalent cooling to 1,000 pounds of ice per week. Another advertisement encourages us to plan a day in Penticton at the second annual Rotary Exhibition and Carnival. Or you can wait another week and go to the first annual Elks Carnival here. But the really big news was that King George VI and Queen Elizabeth were coming to tour Canada in May. The tour was an enormous event, attracting huge crowds all across the country. Through the efforts of the Retail Merchants Branch of the Board of Trade, all local stores are to close on Monday, May 29th, the day the King and Queen are to be in Vancouver. This arrangement will make it possible for business people here to travel to Vancouver without neglecting either businesses or positions. During the monarch's stay in Canada, Germany offered to sign non-aggression treaties with 7 European countries. Russia was battling with Japan at Khalkhin Gol in Mongolia, and Italy and Germany signed the Pact of Steel Treaty. The community of Princeton at the outbreak of war supported 2 butchers, 3 bakers, 3 hotels, 3 car dealers, 2 barbers, a billiards parlor, and a cinema. There was even a hospital and curling rink at nearby Copper Mountain. In June, Britain became embroiled in a diplomatic incident caused by the ongoing war between China and Japan. Bill, Bert, and Ethel Irwin, along with Maisie Ewart, returned home from a successful tour of skiing competitions in the USA and Canada. A touring carnival from Chilliwack came to Princeton. One of the attractions was a wrestling ring. They would pay any comers $1 a minute to wrestle with their athletes. The newly assembled and equipped Elks Band would lead the parade for the Elk Stampede and Rodeo on July the 1st. On July the 10th, Britain reaffirmed its support of Poland against attack from Germany. At the beginning of August, two physicists warned President Roosevelt that the Germans may be attempting to build an atomic bomb. This became profoundly important. A concerted effort was begun to establish a community hall on Bridge Street in Princeton. Most significant events were held in the Orange Hall at that time. The Amber Ski Club would hold a dance on August the 25th with the proceeds to further development of the ski hill. There's a story about the new Boy Scouts troop meeting consistently every Friday night. Sunday, August 20th, is likely to go down in history as Dry Lake Day, or something to that effect, for no less than 4 Princeton organizations held annual picnics at the lakeside that day. At least 250 persons attended the picnics on the shores of the little lake. The Elks and the Princeton Ski Club combined their 2 picnics into one, with results that were pleasing to both groups. The music provided by the Elks loudspeaking system was enjoyed by all. The Canadian Legion and Legion Auxiliary was highly successful, with the pipe band leading a hand at entertaining everyone present. The Fish and Game Association outing offered, as its part of the day's fun, a new form of sports in these parts, aquaplaning. Towed behind Jim Bocock's fast outboard boat, the aquaplaners thrilled the many onlookers and spilled themselves into the lake time and time again. The Elks and Legion turned out to do softball battle during the afternoon, with the ex-servicemen roundly trimming their opponents. After supper, picnickers began to leave the scene of the day's activities, and it was past 7:30 when the last bus rolled home. Then suddenly it happened. Germany invaded Poland, and 2 days later, Britain and France declare war on Germany. Prime Minister Mackenzie King recalled Parliament to discuss the situation. Their first move was to institute the Wartime Prices and Trade Board the same day as the British Declaration. The scope of the board's mandate was very broad. Mackenzie King went on the radio the same day and announced the proclamation of the Defence of Canada Regulations, which were emergency measures implemented under the War Measures Act. The extreme security measures permitted by the regulations included the waiving of habeas corpus and the right to a trial, internment, bans on certain political and cultural groups, restrictions on free speech, including the banning of certain publications, and the confiscation of property. Canada's actual declaration of war came on September the 10th, with the permission of King George VI. The very first victim of the war was the community hall.
All I need to add at the moment is that Canada, as a free nation of the British Commonwealth, is bringing her cooperation voluntarily. Our effort will be voluntary. The people of Canada will, I know, face the days of stress and strain which lie ahead with calm and resolute courage. There is no home in Canada, no family, and no individual whose fortunes and freedom are not bound up in the present struggle. I appeal to my fellow Canadians to unite in a national effort to save from destruction all that makes life itself worth living, and to preserve for future generations those liberties and institutions which others have bequeathed to us.
90 days later, Canadian soldiers were on their way overseas. The first men from Princeton that were accepted to serve were Arno Urquhart, Bill Brown, Arthur Shenton, Tommy Towers, Tony McVickers, and Jim Cooper. Many others enlisted even before Canada formally declared war. Others have enlisted in either Penticton or Vancouver, as there is no enlistment office in Princeton. The Canadian militia did not aggressively expand during the interwar years in the same way that European countries did, so it took a long time before Canada had a significant, trained, and equipped military force. Late 1939 and most of 1940 involved raising the manpower and training on Canadian soil. The militia formally adopted the name Canadian Army in November 1940. At about the same time, the horse was retired from military service. By this time, there were at least 25 service people from the Similkameen Valley overseas. On April 15, 1940, the colliery at Blakeburn and the facilities at Colmont were permanently closed. In August, all citizens over the age of 16 were required to register with the federal government and carry a registration card at all times. Every gun had to be registered, and every radio required a license. All civilian drivers had to pass a competency test. Taxes were raised to pay for the war. The 1st Canadian Division left for England on December 10, 1940. However, brigades from the 2nd Division had previously been deployed overseas. France fell to the Germans just as Canadian troops were arriving. In July, the Battle of Britain began. The local volunteers of the Red Cross increased their efforts. The Legion Women's Auxiliary donated funds from their Christmas social to help bombing victims in England. In October 1940, the Princeton Elks Club began an initiative to ensure that all local service persons overseas received regular supplies of tobacco for their personal use. This was a popular practice in the First World War to help maintain the morale of the troops and was greatly appreciated. Archie McCrum was chairman of the Smokes Fund Committee, assisted by T.O. Rosie Lessard and Dean Miller. Mr. Lessard, along with fellow Elk L.Q. Wilson, co-owned the billiards hall, the Riverside Cabins during the war years. Mr. Lessard was well known by the men that went overseas to serve, so many of the letters sent to the Elks in response to the generosity were addressed to Rosie Lessard. Since Lessard and Wilson were already buying and selling tobacco products through their billiards hall, they had an established relationship with the suppliers, and this probably helped set up the program initially. The Elks posted the names of all recipients in the area post offices and requested from the public the names of any other service people that would qualify to participate. Letters and addresses of overseas personnel in the program were also posted in the billiards hall and James Corey's store at various times. In this way, the public was encouraged to correspond with their friends and families overseas. The residents of the Similkameen Valley were encouraged to support a fund to pay for a Spitfire aircraft. The local brewery produced a special Christmas beer. On December the 14th, the ocean liner Western Prince was torpedoed and sunk. Princeton resident Pete Levac, 4th officer, calmly brought about the rescue of Canadian Minister of Munitions and Supply C.D. Howe and his executives. The Elks' Christmas Eve dance brought 1940 to a close. The letters from home began to arrive.
Dear Tommy, received your parcel a couple of days ago. Also got cigarettes from the Elks. Spent Christmas with some people from the village, very quiet. But went to Brighton for New Year's and really went on a spree. The army put on a fair Christmas dinner, but there was not enough to go around. So they let everybody that had an invitation go out.
In April, 37 volunteers from the Similkameen were overseas, and the Elks had shipped 46,000 cigarettes. The Princeton Theatre finally screened Gone with the Wind, 2 years after its limited release. Full-page advertisements in the local paper encouraged recruitment, as well as the first Victory Bond issue. The Valley's first fatality was registered on October the 14th, 1941, when RCAF Sergeant Gunner Alexander Dixon was shot down over Belgium. At this time, Major General G.R. Perks is in charge of the Canadian 1st Division overseas. A Canadian-built universal gun carrier was displayed in the region to bolster sales of war savings certificates. On December the 8th, Japan attacked Hong Kong. The Royal Rifles and Winnipeg Grenadiers were defending the island and were finally defeated by Boxing Day. On January the 14th, 1942, Canada announced the internment of all adult males of Japanese descent. On the 24th of February, the order was extended to remove all Japanese peoples from the coast to at least 100 miles inland. At one point, the empty town of Blakeburn was proposed to house some of those internees. On the 18th of January, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill addressed a joint sitting of the Canadian Senate and House of Commons. Scrap metal, rubber, and paper, along with cooking fats and bones, were collected to help produce war materials. Dear Sir, thanks to you and all the smoke funders for the 300 exports which I received safely a short time ago. Good cigarettes, any cigarettes, are practically unobtainable, so all of us really look forward to the ones from home. And what do I think of the English? Well, I married an English girl just 10 days ago, so judge for yourself. Yours sincerely, Pilot Officer Fred Waterman. In February 1942, a list of all overseas personnel was published in the Similkameen Star. Food rationing began in July 1942, and citizens were warned against hoarding. Air raid precautions took effect, and the populace was instructed on what to do. Canadians were asked to contribute their earnings to the war effort in a variety of ways. Letters from service people and contributors continued to arrive.
Mr. Lessard, dear sir, enclosed please find a postal note for $2 for the cigarette fund. I have received your letter stating that you have received word from Ray. I also received one from him saying that he is now receiving them regular. He is sure pleased to get them. Freddie is now over in England too. I guess you will be hearing from his wife. As you know, he married Violet Cornish of Princeton on June 2nd and left a week later for overseas. His wife will give you the details of his regiment and number. Thanking you for your good work, I am yours truly, Mrs. F.O. Miller.
Early in 1943, with large numbers overseas, stakeholders in other areas suggested the military take over the distribution of tobacco. This finally did happen in 1944. The people of Princeton were stalwart throughout and set the standard for other small communities. Gasoline rationing goes into effect April 1st. The government has complete control over the labor forces in the country. Individual rights were eroded. By this time, there's 163 service people overseas receiving tobacco from the people of Princeton. 762,000 cigarettes have been purchased and delivered. In March, Flight Sergeant William Penrose was shot down over Germany. Gas rationing, meat rationing, Save Your Fat, the Greek Fund, the Chinese Fund, and the Red Cross needs another $10 million. The Elks want unused household items to auction off to support the Smokes Fund. In April, Warrant Officer Michael East from Headley died. Here is a letter from the year before.
Dear Sirs, many thanks for the 2 shipments of cigarettes which I received today. My cigarette supply was nil, so you will realize just how much your gifts mean to me. At present, the war has a gloomy outlook, if one might put it that way. However, there are better days coming soon. We have one goal, and one goal only, and that, needless to say, is victory. I shall be glad on the day when we will return to Canada and home. Thank you again for your thoughtfulness. Yours very sincerely, Sergeant Pilot Michael G. East.
The Elks celebrated Canada Day with a softball tournament and an evening dance. In July, the Allies invaded Sicily. Corporal Don Lucas died there in August. The Smokes Fund is supplying 178 people, and over 1 million cigarettes have been shipped. Like most communities, the Red Cross here is doing amazing work. Canada has produced over 500,000 motorized vehicles for the war effort. Dear Sir, received 300 cigs, which I thank you 1,000 times over. I'm calling that my lucky gift, as a short time after receiving the gift, a bomb dropped 2 blocks from us, and say, what a mess. Sorry to say a few civilians were killed. I wasn't long in lighting up one of the cigarettes you sent to me. It sort of helps one to relax, regardless of who you are. Thanks to the Elks. Yours truly, Corporal Val Peterson. The Elks sponsored a big housey night in November. We call it bingo now. Young men can now start their military career at 17.
Dear Brother Elks, a few words in appreciation of $300 received today, and to extend to you, one and all, my sincere best wishes for a jolly good Christmas and increasing success in your grand work for the new year. We can't say when the war will be over, but there's one thing we lads from the Similkameen are saying now and for years to come. Complimentary words for the excellent contributions of the BPOE number 280. Fraternally yours, Gordon Gibson.
The end of the year saw the Battle of Artona, Italy. Again, the local paper publishes the names and addresses of all of the service people. On Boxing Day 1943, Private Marcel Landry was killed in the Battle of the Moro River in Italy. The Princeton Volunteer Fire Brigade held a New Year's Eve dance. 1944 saw the number of overseas enlisted relying upon the Elk Smokes Fund increase from 194 to 230, reaching a peak of 244 in April of 1945. It was a tremendous effort to keep up the momentum and continue to support the troops in this way. In May, the Princeton Players Club put on a play called Personal Appearance to a full house at the Capitol Theatre, the proceeds of which benefited the Smokes Fund. Jack Benny brought his cast to Vancouver to broadcast his radio show in support of the 6th Victory Loan program. His wife, Mary Livingston, went to school there for a number of years. Navigator Walter Matthews was killed on May 23rd. June 6, 1944 was the Allied forces' D-Day attack on Normandy, France. Ranville was the first French village to be liberated. Private William Evans died there. Sergeant John Hatton died in the battle for Caen in August. Lieutenant Robert Foster died in Ancona as the war raged on in Italy. Flight Officer Bert Irwin, DFC, rode home in September. To the Elks of Princeton, thanks for the parcel of 300 Wings cigarettes. The boys over here sure appreciate getting Canadian cigs. In fact, as long as any member of the crew has any of a Canadian brand, that's all that's smoked until they're gone. Then it's a question of, oh, when's your next shipment from home, Joe? We're flying Lancasters on this station. Thanks again for the cigs. Yours, Pilot Officer Bert Irwin. Dear friends, many thanks for another of your always welcome cartons of cigarettes, which arrived here this week. They caught me while our unit was right in the midst of the Gothic line, and at a time when nerves are frayed, and a good smoke is like mail from home. Thanks also to the editor and staff of the Similkameen Star for the weekly issue of News from the Valley. Even after entering the 6th year away to the wars, I still managed to find a few familiar names in your columns. Sincerely, Tommy Towers. In September, Air Gunner Dermot McCarthy was killed over Denmark. The newspaper published information on the 5th ration book issue. There were several persons from the Similkameen that did time as prisoners of war. RCAF gunner Harry Allison was one. Dear Sirs, once again I wish to write you expressing my thanks and appreciation for the package of cigarettes I have just received here in Sweden. It makes us doubly appreciate your kind thoughts and good work when we are able to receive your cigarettes, even when in internment. Yours sincerely, Flight Officer Harry Allison. Pilot Officer John East died on November the 20th in England. In December, Pilot Officer Don Curry also died in England.
Dear Rosie, I want to thank you very much for the cigarettes that I received from you. I would have wrote sooner, but I was wounded on February 19th, shortly after I got the cigs. I got 2 bullets through the left arm and 1 across the chest from a machine gun. My arm and hand are quite stiff. Princeton would certainly look good to me right now. I remain as ever, Private Evan Thomas.
Rifleman John MacDonald took part in the liberation of the Netherlands and died there at the age of 19. Corporal Ernest Klug befell a similar fate. So too Corporal Alfred French, but by May the 5th the job was accomplished. 3 days later, on May the 8th, the Germans surrendered. For many, though, the war dragged on. Trooper Albion Perkins perished 3 days after VE Day. Here is a letter from a year before.
Dear Sirs, well, once again I wish to thank you for your kindness. Boy, I sure do appreciate you sending the cigarettes, and they always seem to come at about the right time. I have reverted to trooper, private, in order to get back to my regiment, which is in Italy. One gets pretty fed up with these reinforcement units. There was a draft leaving for Italy, and so I asked if I might be put on it, and they said yes if I reverted, and when I turned in my stripes, they informed me that they were very sorry, but I would have to take basic training before I could go. So after having been in the army for 5 years, I started recruit training again. Now, I instruct part of that training. Oh well, I have only 1 more week of it, and then I shall just have to wait until they form another Italian draft. We have had 1 or 2 of the rocket bombs fall near here. One shook the whole camp and left one hell of a big hole in a field, but other than that, it did little damage. I don't know just where the other one landed, but you can feel the concussion from these things for upwards of 10 miles. Well now, I will stop this rambling and go to bed. Thanks again. Yours respectfully, A. Perkins.
A meeting was held on the 24th of May to consider the question of incorporating the village of Princeton. Dear Sir, here's good news for you. Please don't send any more cigs to me, as I expect to be home in the near future. A million thanks for all of the cigs you have sent me during my time overseas. I was at the front when we were told the war was over, and somehow it was hard to believe. We came up from Italy some time ago and had some rough fighting after crossing the Jessel River in so-called water buffaloes or floating tanks. But during the last 2 weeks of the war, the fighting was not very heavy. Well, I'm sure glad it's over and that I came out of it alive. It will sure be nice to be back in Canada after 20 months of the front or in field hospitals. I never dreamed when I went overseas in 43 that I would be here that long. So now I want to thank everybody who helped make it possible to send cigarettes to all of us from the Similkameen Valley. So long live the Elks, and may they never again be called upon to send anything to the front in Europe. Or in other words, may there never be another war. Sincerely yours, Carl Gustafson. Private Dan O'Neill lost his life while fighting the Japanese in Burma. Flight Lieutenant Theos Lewis succumbed on June the 26th. On September the 2nd, Japan formally surrendered, but for some, the work was not finished. Dear Brother Elks, I've just received another consignment of 300 cigarettes, for which I wish to take this opportunity to thank you and everyone who makes this very fine gesture possible. Now that the war is over, we're still very busy flying over here, including foodstuff and medicine to occupied countries, which I believe are going to suffer a great deal in this forthcoming winter. I did have hopes of joining you this Christmas, but now my trade is frozen over here, so I imagine it will be quite some time before I see the Similkameen again. Thanks a million for the cigarettes, as they're harder to get now than ever before. Yours fraternally, Aircraft Mechanic DeWard Broomfield. The story of the Similkameen Valley service people would not be complete without telling of the adventures of Fred Waterman. While he certainly was not the only one that endured tests, his story is well documented. He enlisted in the RCAF in June of 1940, got his commission as a pilot officer in September 41, and then flew a bomber across the Atlantic Ocean to England, where he remained until February 1942. In January, he married Betty Hennies of Dorset, and then was off to fly over the Middle East. In August, his bomber developed engine trouble over Tobruk, but he achieved his objective and received the Distinguished Flying Cross from King George VI for his efforts. He went on to the Nigerian jungle and contracted malaria. Again, in August 1944, his plane was damaged and he escaped by parachute, landing in a tree with no boots and had to walk in the French mud. In October of 44, Flight Lieutenant Waterman's plane was badly damaged again, but they managed to make a fiery belly landing in England. "I guess I'm doomed to be hung," he is quoted with saying. The Elks sent the final shipment of tobacco to England on October the 15th, 1945, exactly 5 years after the effort started. 60 shipments in all were made. $7,338.03 was collected, and this supported the provision of 2,594,900 cigarettes, as well as pipe tobacco and snuff for those who chose it. The big cities did some amazing things during the war, but the people of Princeton and district showed their spirit in a way that was unequaled by any other small town in Canada.
Done their bit. Everyone has tried, done a bit. Neither the long years, nor the dangers, nor the fierce attacks of the enemy have in any way weakened the unbending renown of the British nation. God bless you all.
Sunny day. Keep smiling through, just like you always do, till the blue skies drive the dark clouds far away. So will you please say hello to the folks that I know? Tell them I won't be long. They'll be happy to know that as you saw me go, I was singing this song. We'll meet again, don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day.